This is Crawford Lake, not to be confused with the one located near Sudbury, Ontario, that's probably filled with acid rain and some sort of toxic sulfurous derivative. This one is located near the jewel of Southern Ontario's Niagara Escarpment, which, for the uninitiated, is also part of UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. Just a guess, someone probably forgot to tell the good people at the UN that the city of Hamilton is parked just down the street, but I digress. It's a relatively small lake that was formed when an unassuming sinkhole drilled through some gazillion-year-old limestone and eventually filled up with water. It covers an area of 2.4 hectares and is some 24 meters deep. For the world's imperialists out there, that would be approximately 37,200,074.400149 square inches across and about 14.3 longitudinal refrigerators deep. And for the rest of all those that want to get technical up in here, it's situated in a karst, a region of limestone shaped and carved by dissolution and underground drainage systems. Although it is partially fed by a small stream and surface precipitation, its main source is actually groundwater, which, oddly enough, is one of the main ingredients for Crawford Lake's newfound fame and fortune. More about that later. Following a rather typical convention, it's named after a family that used to live on the site who eventually donated the property to the local conservation authority, all the while ignoring the fact that the area was long inhabited by the local Huron people, who came and went centuries prior to Mr. Crawford showing up and claiming it all for himself. Although the area has been a site of scientific interest for decades, most of the activities surrounded excavations looking for clues of early habitation of the Attawandaron people. However, in the 1970s, an era best known for brown corduroy bell-bottom pants and the aspic craze, where people served food encased in gelatin made from ground-up horsehoof, scientists became aware of the fact that the sediment in the lake contained pollen of corn and other cultigens, which, at the time, they were able to date back to the late 13th century. And this brings us to why this small slice of Ontario paradise is so famous: mud. In addition to the lake being fed by groundwater, it is also meromictic, meaning its layers of water don't mix with one another. Kind of like ice cream and bacon, or tight pants and Mexican food from a sketchy food truck. The advantage to this is that although most meromictic lakes are generally anoxic, Crawford Lake's monomolybdean, or bottom layer, isn't. And since we're at the point of this so-called rather drawn-out documentary where the words are getting pretty weird, you should know that the upper layer of this sort of a setup is called the mixolimnian. None of this should be confused with a normal body of water that would usually be holomictic in nature. And in the event of finding all of these $10 words annoying or confusing, you can thank Mr. Ingo Findenegg, who came up with this particular word salad around 1935. On an unrelated note, he left the earthly scene in 1974, so there is no worry about any other needless lingo from that lost part of academia. But I digress. Returning to our original programming, the advantage of having oxygen present at the bottom of this lake is that it actually preserved traces of plutonium from nuclear bomb testing that started when the United States was looking for a bigger boom way back when. And as the bottom layer is undisturbed, it creates the perfect environment for the formation of, wait for it, varves. Varves? Really? Varves? This particular bit of nomenclature is actually the technical term for a layer of sediment. Like the dust under a teenager's bed, they accumulate year after year and can be read like the rings of a tree. Crawford Lake sediment layers are unique because of seasonal changes in water temperature. Although dust, pollen, ash, and nuclear fallout are present all year round, as the upper layer of the lake, the mixolimnian, try to keep up already, we have lots to cover, well, it warms up in the summer and dissolves the limestone more readily, causing the resultant calcium and carbonate ions to crystallize and fall to the bottom, creating a nice white cap on top of the goop that collected over the previous months. On a side note, somebody did the math and figured out that, at the present rate of accumulation, it'll take some 30,000 years to fully fill in, give or take a couple of months or here or there. However, it's this precious muck that has scientists the world over in a lather. You heard that right. Nerds find lake bottom gumbo exciting. I'll bet somebody's mom got a confusing all sciencey late night telephone call from their still single son about that one. According to core samples pulled from the lake, they've been able to put a picture of at least the last 1,000 years of history together by studying the contents of the various layers of sediment. While sedimentology isn't necessarily a new field of research, it's the clarity of the record at Crawford Lake that sets it apart. If you have a vague, regrettable recollection of high school, you may remember a balding science teacher use words like Quaternary period, Pleistocene and Holocene epochs, and maybe even Cambrian or North Agrippian ages. Well, these bougie terms simply reflect periods in history that began and ended based on accepted events. Where Crawford Lake comes in is the fact that it clearly recorded the end of the Holocene and the beginning of the Anthropocene epoch. It also marks the end of the so-called Megalaean and the start of the, wait for it, Crawfordian age. Yep, Captain Obvious was clearly on that particular board of directors when they came up with that singular gem. Remarkably, most of the research has been done by local universities and scientists right here in good old Kanakistan, with some samples sent to places like the UK and further afield. And it's a good thing too, given England's proclivity for simply taking cultural relics home and then declaring them the property of the Crown. There would have been the distinct possibility of waking up one morning and finding Crawford Lake parked on the British Museum's front lawn, with a large plaque making grandiose statements about how this was discovered by the Welsh, preserved by the Scottish, and then used by the Irish to make whiskey, for the betterment of mankind the world over and all that. Crawford Lake is open to the public and can be visited up close and in person by anyone wanting to see this 8th natural wonder of the world. Just leave your 4x4 parked at the gate, your fishing poles and shotguns in the car next to your supply of Bud Light. And as always, thank you for watching.